Welcome to Coffee and History, a conversation with Alabama Heritage. We are your hosts. I'm Rebecca Mender,
Susan Reynolds,
and Caroline Gazera-McKenzie.
Join us as we sit down with some of the most fascinating figures in the state of Alabama over a hot or cold cup of coffee. We'll explore some captivating tales of Alabama, stories that educate, inspire, and we hope entertain. And we're thrilled to have all of our listeners and viewers here with us today. You know, every episode we like to start with something called Did You Know? Now, Did You Know is just something that is, you know, an interesting fun fact about the state of Alabama, maybe something that's new to our listeners. It could be even new to us. And today, I actually wanted to talk about the University of Alabama because our guest today is a professor at the University of Alabama. And did you know that the very first sustained enrollment of African American students at the University of Alabama, it was achieved in 1963. I mean, that, if you think about it, that was not that long ago.
No.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And do you guys know who it was?
We
had
do.
Two students.
Yes.
I'll give you 5 bonus points if you can name at least one person.
You want to name the first one, Susan?
Vivian Malone.
That's right.
And James Hood.
That's right. And they actually now, the university does have a Hood Malone Plaza in remembrance of those 2 students. James Hood actually, well, Vivian actually graduated in 1965, so she finished her degree. But James Hood actually came back and finished his degree in 1995, and then he received a PhD in 1997. So
awesome.
That was kind of cool.
Yeah.
Yes. So congratulations. So that was really great to have a new memorial plaza in honor of them.
And the plaza is right next to Foster Auditorium, which holds a lot of historical information.
That's right, including School in the Stand.
Stand at the schoolhouse door.
Thank you.
Or in the schoolhouse door.
Words are hard today.
It's okay.
Words are very hard today, and that's probably why we have this guest, and because we need some help with words, because obviously we're not doing very well. So Caroline, can you tell me who is our guest for today?
So on today's episode, we are excited, actually I'm ridiculously excited to welcome Dr. Dianne Bragg, the Associate Professor of Journalism and Creative Media at the University of Alabama. She is my former professor. I absolutely adore her. She is the reason I know the First Amendment from class. So I'm excited to welcome Dr. Dianne Bragg.
Woo! Yay! Welcome
Thank
to
you all so much. This is
Hi.
great.
We're so glad to have you here
I'm
today.
so glad to be here today.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, she says that you're her favorite, but honestly, I honestly didn't meet you until probably 2017 or 18. I actually met you officially, I think, at a multicultural journalism workshop, and that the university was hosting. I was like, oh my God.
I remember that.
We went together, Susan
Yes.
and I did, and I was like, I know who she is, and I just want to be her friend, and so I'm going to introduce myself. And I think you said, oh yeah, I know who you are. And I was like, oh, she knows me.
I knew you. I would see you at all the graduations.
Yes.
She was always there, every one of them, and I knew you from the magazine and all the different things that you did, and social media. We were on there.
That's
like,
true.
Yeah,
That's true.
definitely.
Everybody's friends on social media. So yeah, so I can see why, Caroline loves you so much, because I've worshipped you from afar. Just
Well,
saying.
I paid her. It's okay.
Clearing this up, I was not paid for my endorsement of Dianne Bragg. I just absolutely adore her. She took me under her wing, especially in undergrad, and then she became my favorite professor in grad school for her history of journalism course. And that was a paper that still stays with me. So I want to start talking with, let's talk about your courses. You teach history of journalism to our students and mass communications and a bunch of other things. What's that like?
Oh, it's so much fun because we have graduate students that come in who have never taken any type of history of journalism class, and they are journalism graduate students. So we hopefully learn a lot of things that they're just not familiar with, and a lot of fun facts. And as you know, Caroline, I let them choose their topics for their papers. We kind of go through a long process with
Yes.
that. Hers was very international in
Yes, mine was.
focus. Yes, definitely.
And don't you still use my paper as an example?
I do.
Is it as an example of what not to do, or?
Okay, wait. I busted my booty for this class. I was obsessed with my paper because I got to work with the Japan Times. So by being able to bring in sources from international, it was just such a magnificent experience to talk with her about it.
That's
I
great.
mean, Caroline was one of those students. She was like, I want to do this paper, and she found a friend who was still
In Japan.
in Japan who was scanning pages for her because they were not available. They were not digitized. That's been a long time ago.
Yeah, I know.
It was wonderful.
Yeah.
It was, but it was the class that shaped me, especially when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And you definitely helped with that, you know, so I'm thankful for you.
Well, I'm thankful for you, and you know, I think about you almost every single day because of one of my pets. Do you remember that?
Oh yes. So let's talk about your pets because you are a great pet mom. You have some dogs, but you also have a cat.
I do have a cat.
Now tell me the story of who named your cat.
Oh my goodness. So the backstory is a little bit, I don't live far from campus, and often we'll end up with strays that show
Oh,
up
yeah.
on my step, and I usually try to find homes, and there was this one that showed up starving to death and kind of was hanging around. I took him to the vet and had him checked out, and I didn't want to get attached, so I named him Cat. And I thought, you know, there's some distance there with that. It's like dog, cat, whatever. And this one here said, well, you know, that was Audrey Hepburn's cat in Breakfast at Tiffany's, which of course is one of my favorite
Yeah,
movies. And that was 11 years ago.
roughly. Cat is living his best life still.
Right. Spell it with a K. You know.
That's good.
Yeah, but so okay, the cat. Then you also have birds. You do lots of different
You know, I
things.
have lots of birds in the
Are
yard. Nothing in the house.
a female Dr. Doolittle? Is that what I'm trying to find out here?
No, not really. I mean, I do have lots of animals around, but one of my dogs died last year, so that was Woody, which was hard. He was adopted him from some friends in Memphis who were having to move to Germany, and he would their last name was Wilson, and he was Woodrow. And so,
Oh, that's so cute.
I called him Woody for short. But then I adopted Gus a few years after that, so I still have Gus, the little dog. Yeah.
Aw, that's a great name too.
It is. And you, so previously, you had a neighbor, Mrs. Brannon.
Did, yes.
Mrs. B.
Mrs. B.
That's right.
And I know you posted a lot on, you know, almost like life lessons that you learned from
I
her.
did, without a doubt.
I feel like you need to write a book about that.
Do you know, it's so funny. Several people have said that. One of my colleagues and friends, Maya Champion, actually sent me a list of chapter titles. It's like, okay, you got to get going on this. And then another friend, Marquette, who taught here for a few years, and then sadly died a few years ago. And one of the last text messages I have from her, she said, you have to write a book about Miss Brannon. And I just need to figure out the way to go about that. But yeah, we posted a lot. She was full of lots of stories and lots of history of Tuscaloosa, and actually she was from West Blockton. I actually have a quilt that West Blockton burned. You're probably
Right.
familiar with it. Remember the big fire? So her family lived there. They had a small, I think they ran a small restaurant or diner kind of situation. But the ladies in the town did a quilt to auction off to help raise money to rebuild the town. That was just one of the many things they did. And they took the signatures of everyone who lived there at the time and stitched them into this quilt. And then they raffled it off. And Miss Brannon's father won, and his name is on the quilt, and I have the quilt.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I think honestly, that quilt, that signature quilt, I think is referenced in our very first issue of Alabama Heritage Magazine from 1986.
Is it
So
really?
we did a story on quilts, and I'm very familiar with that signature quilt, and I'm pretty sure that's where it came from. Was
Isn't that the
particular article,
Lamford
so-
family quilt, if I recall, from issue
I
one?
can't remember the name, but it's just you know it's
It's a beautiful
That's a
quilt.
great idea, honestly, to have a signature quilt like that.
It really is, and I just recently reached out to a friend on campus about archiving that quilt, because I'm not the owner of that quilt. I'm sort of the caretaker right now, and I need to figure out where that needs to like land, so.
Well, I think it was
yeah.
really cool when you had, so how old was Mrs. B when she passed away?
She was 95.
Wow.
95. And so just knowing that you could go next door to your neighbor, which is honestly in today's day and age, that's a rarity to begin with.
This is true.
Nobody wants you to come over anymore.
Mhm.
But to be able to go to your neighbor's house and then, you know, you would take little snapshots, and it wouldn't necessarily be of Ms. B. Sometimes she would be in the photo,
Mhm.
but then sometimes it might be just like a stack of books or a stack of newspapers next to her favorite chair.
Right.
And it was just the whole scene that you captured of how this woman was living and what kind of life that she had, and the way that you would caption each photo. It just really brought to life, you know, her story to people who had never met her before. And I just thought that was a wonderful visual way of documenting her life. And I felt like you could really turn that into a book, because it sounds like if you've lived 95 years, I'm sure you have lots of advice to give. So.
And she also, if I recall, towards the later end, before she passed, she had found her husband's World War II memorabilia. Is that correct?
She had some of his things, she did, and when we moved her toward the end of her life, we found a number of things she did not know that she had in a cedar chest.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Could you elaborate on what was found?
Well, there were some pictures of him in his uniform, and she also shared the story with me that he won the Bronze Star, but he had never told anyone. They found out when he died, because they were getting the marker from the Veterans Administration, and he had just never said anything about the fact that he had won that. But there was part of a uniform and some buttons, just some small things like that.
Right.
And what was that like, just experiencing that? It's just, that's history.
It is, very much so, very much so. I think really, to be honest, the thing that really got me was the quilt. And that was to find that had been in there all that time.
It's so
and to hear that
personal.
story,
Mhm.
yes, very
Yeah.
much so.
Well, do you teach your students, because I know it's most of your classes is all focused on journalism, which is, you know, can be a little bit more just the facts ma'am type writing, but do you also teach them in terms of storytelling? You know, how do you weave that into the fabric of what they're trying to write without
Right.
making it too
Dry.
well, I was gonna say not too personal, because I mean I think you know there's a certain fine line that you can cross. But I mean, how do you try to talk to them about storytelling and how to build that, and how does that look
We
like?
do. When you talk about historical writing, qualitative writing, and telling a story, and when you're doing history, that's kind of what you want to do. You want the reader to read it and enjoy it, and so it's finding the balance between that and not having them, if they've chosen a very personal topic, not becoming too, as you said, personal or biased in some
Right.
way. And one of the first things you have to do is, especially today, is teach everyone not to be using first person all
Right.
the time. And that we're not looking for opinion, we're looking for what you can state based on the facts of what you have. You can have a conclusion at the end from what you've learned, and that's all well and good. But it is easier than you would think in some ways, because the reason students are in journalism, at least here at Alabama, is because they do want to tell stories. And so they want to kind of find out how to do that. And so many of their papers have ended up being stories. Ryan Phillips, his
Right.
paper where he found, you know, the newspaper that was published at Bryce, and it was the meteor.
Yeah.
And so he found all these issues that were in Hool and just wrote this great paper. And he ended up very focused on the unnamed editor during the years that he was looking at it. And so we learned so much about that. And it's really great when they find topics, like Caroline did because of the Japanese connection, that they are just so passionate about. And it makes, and I learned something every single semester. It's like I'm going to school as well.
That's the best
And
part of teaching to
it
me.
is. Oh, it really
Yeah,
is. And
yeah.
those are that's just a really wonderful thing that I broadened my horizons through the class.
Well, so a lot of ours, like you mentioned, Ryan, who's kind of gone off to do some great things here locally, and we've had some other students through the department who have gone on to do great things. I mean, I feel like we really have a successful program at the University of Alabama.
I agree. You hear a lot of, well, there is a lot of wringing of hands about journalism right now, and we have found that our students all seem to find their way and their place into jobs that they love. And they're all jobs that have to do with knowing how to write, knowing how to gather information, knowing how to be unbiased and have an open mind and really bring a story to whatever it is that you're doing. And that's a really great ability, and I think we teach that well here. I do.
And you could end up as the White House correspondent or have your own
You
show
could.
on
That's
CNN.
right.
You just
Yes.
never know.
Publish
Oh,
it,
my
your
goodness.
books, you know.
Yes,
And
yeah.
a lot of those that big names that are out and about are semi-recent students, you know, within the past 15 years.
Right.
And you taught them.
There are some, and then there's some that were a little before my time, but like you say, we had Christy Parsons here, and her stories, she spoke to my mass comm law class, and it just, I had them write a little short summary of something she said that meant something to them, and they were so powerful, and they were so encouraged and inspired by her, and she was so honest and open, and it was really wonderful. And there are a lot of people like that come through this program, even if we don't know their names.
Yeah, I mean, I think that just even, I was a journalism major as well here, and I think that even, I mean, we tend to forget about them because we always focus on the people who are really famous now, right? But there's so many people doing important work just on a smaller scale.
They are,
You know,
absolutely right.
Because at the local level, it's definitely important.
It is, and you know, when you think about, there's so much media out there that's focused on the national and international,
Right.
and really when it comes home to your backyard,
Right.
that's what matters. What's going on at city council, what's going on at the
Right.
historic commission, you know,
Right.
all of those things
All of
are
those
important.
things are important, absolutely.
So, like, you're, I'm gonna go way back.
Way back.
Let's do this.
Let's talk about your dissertation just a second.
Okay, all right.
But so it was based on newspapers during the
It
Civil
was.
War. Can you tell us a little bit more about your findings in that? Because that's to me fascinating.
I can. So Dr. Sloan, which we were talking about him earlier, had been my professor, and he became the chair of my committee. But I had taken my focus within the PhD program here was history. So I had taken classes in the history department, and Dr. Rothman, I took a class with him, and Dr. Rabel, who is retired now, but a name we will never forget around here. So anyway, for Dr. Rothman's class, I looked at the Tennessee newspapers from the beginning of the Civil War till when Tennessee fell, which was pretty quickly within the first year. And got to make some trips to I'm from Memphis, so this was something close to my heart, but I got to go to the Tennessee archives and really read those papers. And when you're looking at the old papers from your hometown, like in Memphis, you can get lost. I even visited Elmwood Cemetery there because one of the printers was buried there. I went by and paid my respects. We had a little chat. But anyway, so when it came time to choose what I was going to write my dissertation on, Dr. Sloan was very interested in looking at what newspapers were saying leading up to the war. What were the conflicts between the North and the South? What were the arguments that you were reading in the papers? And as Dr. Rabel, we talked to him about it, newspapers are often sources in Civil War books, but there really hadn't been one where it was about the newspapers.
Right.
And so that's what my dissertation did, was looking at as many newspapers as I could find. At the time, not as many were digitized as are now, but there were a lot. Because like 5 years later, Dr. Sloan said, you really need to start writing this and quit reading. And so I did, but it was looking at the different topics that people were arguing about. And I can say unequivocally that the central issue was slavery,
Right.
but the way it was argued about had many different aspects, be it economic issues, social issues, religious issues, cultural issues, all of these different things, but they all kind of led right back to that.
Well, I know it can go down a huge hole looking at these newspapers, because I know you were looking specifically about how they talked about the different aspects of the war, but did you also find all these other interesting things about just how people lived and what other articles that were not related to the war? I mean, so what were some of the things that they would talk about?
You know, a
Or
lot of
write
it is
about?
the language that you would see. So when you think about, for example, Harriet Beecher Stowe and some people like that that we're familiar with, women who would write either for abolitionist magazines or newspapers, or in her case, the book, which started as a newspaper serial, but they would refer to women who were doing this kind of writing. They had unsexed themselves.
Yes, yes. I
And-
came across a lot of that too.
Yes, and I remember the first time I read them, I'm like, what are they talking about? Like, and basically that it was inappropriate for a woman to write about these kinds of things.
Right.
And it was something that, you know, if anybody did it, it should be a man. And you were to say to a woman in the 1800s that, you know, you had unsexed yourself was really a
Right.
terrible
Exactly.
thing to say. And so that was surprising. I ran across several stories dealing with particular incidents with slaves, slaves who had freed themselves, and how the different ways they were covered in northern and southern newspapers. And some of them were very traumatic to read. The papers were pretty matter of fact about different stories, and some of the relationships, it's very, you can get very caught up in a lot of that. And I had to, in the end, sort of divide these up into the topics I was going to look at in the dissertation, and I still have a big folder of stories that I would
It's
love to have.
so hard to decide.
It
I mean,
is.
and I would find something that just fascinated me, and I would write. You know, I don't have a problem with killing your darlings, but I will write about it, and I will be told, "Do not have that." I'm like, "Okay, fine, I'll take it out, but I'll keep it for later."
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, it sounds like a great article for Alabama Heritage
True.
Magazine that
It
maybe
does.
you should be
It
doing for
does.
us.
That's
I
right.
might
Keep that in mind.
consider that.
Mhm.
Yes.
We would love to have an article.
We know
Yeah.
we know how to find you.
You do. I'm not far.
That's true.
Now, going back to when you were reading through those Civil War newspapers, in class we also talked about that, you know, newspapers were also basically a bulletin board of just different local things happening. Did you see that in those newspapers as well?
You do, and often they would be things that would point to a truth that was not really being published correctly. One example that stood out for me when I got into the war in Tennessee, looking at that particular paper, the Battle of Shiloh, which was right outside of Memphis. And when you would read the Tennessee papers, in particular the Memphis papers, it was all about how glorious a win it was. And in truth, it was a 2-day battle. The first day, the Confederates did fairly well, but the second day, the tide turned, so to speak. But you really didn't see that in the Memphis papers. It was still about, you know, we've done so well, et cetera, et cetera. And then about 2 weeks later, as I'm going through these papers, you start to see the death notices and these long columns of names of young men who had died. And I was just struck by that, because this cognitive dissonance that's right here in this paper, that how can you read these stories and then look at all these names? Everyone knew someone who had died there. And so stories like that really jump out at you. They do.
I still remember a poem that Herman Melville wrote about Shiloh, and I think of him, I think of Moby Dick, right?
Mhm.
But that poem to me is one of the most poignant poems I've ever come across.
I have a small book at home. I need to pull it out,
Yeah.
that has a bunch of the poetry and some of the songs from that period,
Right.
and they are very haunting to say
They
the
are.
least.
They are.
I think one of the things that I learned the most about the Civil War when I was doing some research was the photography
Right.
and all of the, like, I think it's called daguerreotype. I'm gonna mispronounce that.
Not gonna try to pronounce it either. I know
thank
exactly
you.
what you mean. But
Was
yes.
it the first war to be
And
photographed?
I think it was.
It was the first war where we actually had, other than like woodcuts and
Right,
drawings, that we
right.
actually had
And just,
photos.
so you would
Yeah.
see, scenes that were actually, people who were,
Right.
just dead and mangled, and it was just horrifying. But then also, it was real popular to take photographs of the dead, and they
Right.
would even prop them up
They would.
and make them look alive, and then the rest of the family or friends would be sitting around them. It's almost like, a Christmas photo
Right.
or
The
something.
photography was so expensive,
it
and
might
that
have
would
been
have
the
been the
only-
last thing you ever had of that.
Or the
person.
only thing, it could
Yeah.
have been the only photo that you
Yeah.
had, yeah. I have this one photo of my grandfather. He was in the first war, and I think it was 19, I don't know, he was 17 years old. And there's a picture of him, and my mom said that he had actually just gotten injured, and they, patched him up or whatever, threw his uniform on to take and took his picture. And so every time I see that photo, it's a little haunting, because you think, well, he's just a kid. He's only 17 years old,
Right.
and he just got wounded. And now they're saying, okay, now we want to get you all, gussied up and take your photo. So it's just, the whole concept of that, to me, is very bizarre.
We now have that in common. My grandfather fought in World War I as well. And I have a photo of him.
Maybe we have the same grandfather.
Mine was a little older than yours, so probably not. But
You never know, we could be sisters.
We could be, we might as well run with that. Yeah,
Of course, I
definitely.
don't have anything in Memphis that I know of, so I have to know how it feels. First of all, why did you come to Alabama, and how does it feel to be, in Alabama now that
I've been here for a long time. I have. So, it's still the South, but Memphis is a very different place than Tuscaloosa. I did as many Southern women or women everywhere do. I followed a man here that did not work out well in many ways, but the way it did work out well was I got my PhD here, which I was teaching at the University of Memphis. 2 of my degrees are from there, and I had considered doing a doctorate, but didn't really want to do a third one at the same school. And so I had looked into going to Ole Miss, and then this worked out, and I came here, and it was a little bit of a shock to move to Tuscaloosa. Memphis is much more like Birmingham, I would say, as far as the size, the diversity, the food, just a lot there. So this was very much the smallest place I had ever lived. It's changed a lot in the last almost 20 years that I have been here, and there are good people wherever you go, and I found some of the best people here, so that has been wonderful. Made some really dear, good friends, and I've found my place here. But I did live most of my life in Memphis. I still go back a lot. My oldest son still lives there, so I go there pretty frequently.
But you also travel all around Alabama.
I do travel all over the place. I do. So I go down to South Alabama a lot, to the Mobile area. Just love being down there. I've been to Selma. I've been to a number of Montgomery a number of times. A lot of it will be academic conferences that you'll go different places. I just got back from a historic home tour up in Florence, which was absolutely fabulous.
Really?
So I enjoy doing those kinds of things. But yeah, I've gotten to know the state pretty well. And it's, so Calvin Cockrell is one of my students,
He's
right?
our proofreader.
Yes, so Calvin wrote a paper about when the territory was split to form Alabama and Mississippi. It's one of the titles I'm most proud of that he came up with, The Split That Shaped the South.
Nice.
Got to love alliteration. And so I would often pass Washington County, and this which was the seat of, I guess it was, I don't know if it was the state or county seat at the time, but the seat of government for the territory. And so I would pass that when I would travel south, and I never knew the history of that, but I learned it from Calvin, so, yeah.
He's great.
He is,
Yeah.
he is.
I remember seeing a marker, driving down to Montgomery, I think it was, with, a former professor here on campus, and she was like, you know, well, that's where the state of Florida used to be, and it's like, what? I'm now in Florida, and it was this high up, and it was just really kind of fun, cause I mean, she was probably 9,000 years old, but I mean, you know, it's nice to be able to have people, cause a lot of times when you see these markers on the road too, you don't even pay attention to them.
No, exactly.
And, you know, we have friends, who actually go and look at all the historic markers throughout the state. Anytime they're going somewhere, that's the first
Yeah.
thing they do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I like roadside attractions, they like historic markers, you know, and I think it's great to be able to read these because you learn so much about
You do.
what's in your own backyard.
Right, and you know, it's always wonderful wherever you go to find the great local bookstore that's going to have like the local authors who maybe even self-published something
Right.
about their history there, and there's so much that you can learn from those. It's just really, yeah, looking for the great bookstores, and there's some fabulous ones in every little town here in
Oh,
the
yeah.
state, for sure.
We definitely have a good one here in Tuscaloosa.
We do, yes.
We fully support
Mhm.
Ernest and Hadley
We
booksellers.
do.
Go check them out.
Yeah.
They're wonderful. Yeah. Well, do we want to go ahead and move on to our Did You Know?
Yeah.
section? Not Did You Know, I'm sorry, Before You Go. we're trying
It
to
might be
time travel.
both. Yeah.
Let's just go with that. So our Before You Go section is where we just kind of give you some fun, quirky questions to
Okay.
answer. And since we're time traveling and we've talked
Are.
about time travel, if you could time travel back to a particular point in history, where would you go? Which point?
Wow, that's a really good question. I think that if I could be back in Memphis, I would like to be there I was there in the civil rights movement, but I was too young.
Right.
And I would like to have been at an age where I could have participated. I knew people who had marched with Martin Luther King Jr. And since that's my hometown, I think that I would love to have been a part of that movement. So I'll just
that's
say I was
great.
here, but just not old enough.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great answer. That's a great answer.
So I guess I will ask, what is your hidden talent?
My hidden talent? Oh my goodness, I don't even know that I have any talents.
You have plenty of talents. I am living proof that you can create talent.
Well, I'll just, I grew up singing in church choirs.
I
As
didn't
many
know
of us
that.
Did. Well, everyone of a certain age grew up singing in the church choir. And I don't do that now, but I can sing pretty well. I do in my car a lot,
Mhm.
yes, and at home, and so I still sing. I'm not gonna sing here.
Dang it.
Don't even go there.
I knew she was about to do that.
Dang it. I was gonna get you to go ahead.
No.
Yeah, I mean, I could get you some honey for the throat, warm
No,
up, you
don't
know,
do that.
shot of bourbon maybe.
No.
So, what was your first concert?
Cat Stevens.
Oh, wow.
How old,
Yes,
well, if you don't
I
mind.
went with a friend of mine's older brother who I had a crush on, and I was probably 14 or 15 at the time.
And where was it? Was it
It was
close
at the
by?
Mid-South Coliseum in Memphis.
Okay, so you didn't have to travel far
Oh,
for
no,
it.
no, it was right there, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And what'd your folks think about that, going to a concert at age 15?
Do you know, I don't remember them thinking anything. They knew him, they knew the family, and so I don't think it didn't really go anywhere, so, yeah, so.
Do you still like Cat Stevens today?
I do, actually. I still like his music. He's not one of my top favorite. I did see Prince. And
Oh,
that's
wow.
probably my number one concert would be that. But,
Just so you know, I've seen Elvis, so.
I,
Since you're a Memphis girl.
I know. I never saw Elvis in person, ever. So, yeah.
My friend and I used to take, this is embarrassing, but we used to do, we would go every summer for a while, we would take a trip from the birthplace to the grave.
There you
We
go.
called it our birthplace to the
Yes.
grave tour, and
The
we
Tupelo
would get
tour.
Tupelo
Yes,
to Memphis. Every
Mhm.
summer we'd make the pilgrimage, and it was so
Yeah.
much fun.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
We took my mom, she was always a huge Elvis fan. She's the
Oh,
one that
yeah.
took me, cause I was only, I don't know, 6, 7 years old, cause I saw, my first 2 concerts were Elvis when I was a little girl, when he was
Wow.
in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah.
So since she was always a big fan, I said, well, we need to do the birth to
Yeah.
grave. I
Yeah.
never even heard of it that
It has a
way,
name.
but you know, we decided to do that, and it was so much fun. And I tell you what, one of the things that I was floored with is I didn't realize Graceland was as small as it was. The
It
actual
is,
house
right.
itself,
It's
it's
not
got
very
plenty of
large.
property, but the house
Mhm.
itself, much smaller than you would think.
It is,
so.
I think, many people are surprised when they go to see it.
Yeah.
It's that tiny.
Okay, next question. You had mentioned how Memphis has wonderful food.
Mhm.
So what is your favorite Alabama meal?
Oh gosh, my favorite Alabama meal. So it's probably gonna be, down in Fairhope, Alabama. Panini Pete's is probably my favorite place. I love their beignets are better than anywhere else in the world.
Ooh,
and
those are fighting words.
Those are, but they're true.
They're
you know,
true.
so they're true. So that would probably be my favorite thing.
And they have a great courtyard to sit
The
in
courtyard's
outside.
wonderful, and
Love
they
it.
have a great lunch too,
Yeah.
and everything. But breakfast there on a beautiful morning, you really can't find a better place in the world to be.
We'll have to remember that one.
We
Yes,
need to go on a field trip.
Obviously.
it would be good. Yes.
Maybe the historical association end up there, like they were talking about. At some
That would be
point.
really
Ah, yes.
That'd be a great trip.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, one last question.
Okay.
Define happiness.
Oh my gosh. Being content.
Yes.
Being content. Just being happy with
Peaceful.
what you've been given, and peace would be really great. Yeah, but just being content, I think.
I love it. Perfect.
That's because Diane is amazing.
She is amazing.
Yeah.
And this has been an amazing episode, and we
It has
appreciate you. So thank you so much, Dianne
Thank
Bragg,
y'all for having me.
joining us today. And we thank you, our listeners and our viewers, for watching us and joining us on this edition of Coffee and History, a conversation with Alabama Heritage. Remember, you can find our podcast at our website, alabamaheritage.com, or wherever you hear your podcast. And also, watch us on YouTube, because that way you can see what we look like. And every time we make a mistake, we don't edit it out. I don't know why we do that, but we're crazy enough to do it. But you know what? Join us next time. But first, I need more coffee. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.